If you've been a listener of Generator for a while, you know that the running joke is that I've never really known how to start a podcast episode, and quite frankly, this week is no different. But what is different is that I get to take a break from talking photography, and I get to dive a bit deeper into the metaphysical aspects of creativity. My guest this week is Natalie Tischler, a dancer, actor, writer, and a woman so multifaceted, it's hard to believe she has the time to fit in the Mystical Movement Show. That's the podcast she hosts and produces on the topics of creativity and expression and healing. I first met Natalie in Missouri because she's the sister of my good friend Mitzi Starkweather, which you can hear that episode in episode 16. One afternoon, Mitzi took us to a restaurant called Krabby's, and it's where I became really intrigued by Natalie's story. Through long conversations, I knew Natalie would be perfect for Generator. The conversation that I got today just solidified that assumption even more. We really dig into the concepts of creativity as it relates to the body, how we can achieve a state of flow, how to approach balance, recognizing burnout, and all the techniques that Natalie and I use to address these issues. There's even a bit of talk about pasta sauce, but I'll let you listen so you can get the full context. We could have talked about any one of those concepts for well more than an hour, but we packed them all in, and this one is pretty material dense, so you'll certainly be left wanting more. That's why it is my absolute pleasure to bring to you this week the talented and eloquent Natalie Tischler. Now on with the show. I am excited to introduce you to everybody because I know I've been listening to the Mystical Movement podcast, your podcast, and I've been really excited by what I hear there and how you're approaching creativity and well-being and expression and healing, and you're bringing all of these things together into like your story that just keeps growing and keeps growing and keeps growing. Before we get into a lot of questions that I have, let's talk a little bit about the podcast and what you're doing now. And the first episode was all about your story. And it's like 45 minutes long, thereabouts. It's an awesome episode, gave me a ton of information. Can you summarize it in like a minute?
I would actually love to hear your 1 minute version.
Okay, so the 1 minute version. All right. Let me see if I can do it. And please fill in the blanks, right? Because
I love it.
My synopsis is that you've been going through, for probably the past 4 or 5 years, this steady growth in self-exploration, in understanding of yourself, of a desire to grow and create a life that you feel is 100% yours. And you are not living up to other people's standards. You are not performing for others, even as a performer, as a dancer, and an actor, and a writer. Like, you're not performing for anyone else. You morphed that into 1,000 days of movement. I think it was like a month of movement, and then it was like 1,000 days of movement, right? You had EMDR therapy in there. You started exploring getting certifications in physical therapy and nutrition. And it was just this blossoming of your own spirituality coming out of a childhood that was very religious, going into different types of spirituality and expansion and understanding of yourself. Am I kind of getting warm on some of this?
You definitely passed. You passed.
Okay, cool.
The test. Yeah.
Cool. So in there's a lot, right? And like I said, it's a super dense episode and I loved listening to it. Was this kind of month of movement, 1,000 days of movement? Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of how that fit into what you're doing now and how you're feeling now?
Yeah, I love that part really landed, because I think that there's something in there that, even back to like where I am right now, what I'm thinking a lot about is just the power of every single day. That like every day the sun is born and dies again. and we have that same opportunity to be born and die every day and create that. And that's like one of our greatest creative abilities, I think. So Month of Movement was actually an idea that I had to combine personal training with dance and dance therapy. And so it was this, because I had a lot of people reaching out to me about fitness and stuff, but all of my fitness was from dance. Like everything that I was doing, it was never like to burn the calories or to do the things. It was to learn the dance, to get to experience the things. The why was something else. Month of Movement came up as this idea, and I started to do it about 7 years ago, and coaching people one-on-one. So just be once a week through this month of movement. And then it really evolved actually during the pandemic to be this 4-week coaching program where I made a process called the alchemical creative process, where it's using the elements to find a really authentic creativity that's rooted in your personal sovereignty, in your willpower, your habits and physical experiences, and the material world that you can relate to your own mindset, to the beliefs that you hold, the morals, like all of those kinds of like mental beliefs and things, all the way to your emotions as well, and how you want to feel and how you feel doing certain things. And so that's how Month of Movement evolved. And it was actually 1,000 Days of Dance was something that it was a friend of mine inspired it. 1,000 Days of Dance for mental health awareness. And picture this, right? I start in December of 2019. So I'm thinking, right, I can go out and dance. And I did for about the first, what would that have been, 60 to 90 days.
Yeah.
And then came lockdown. But here I was 1/10 of the way through this thing that I had challenged myself to. But it was one of the really line in the sand kinds of experiences for me, as far as the relationship between physical health, mental health, emotional health, and ultimately creative health. Because something else I've been thinking a lot about lately is that I don't think healing is the goal. Healing is the process, and creativity is the goal. The healing is so we can get to be more creative, not just to get to keep on healing, heal some more.
Well, you had this interesting, and I forget where to credit it to, but I know you either read it or saw it or was part of maybe your personal training, but you focused on wellness versus well-being. And that kind of fits into this healing that you're talking about a little bit, right? So where we think if we have to be healed, then we are healed. That is the end goal, rather than it being a process. We look at our own personal health, our own mental health as a score. And you can't score wellness. You can't score well-being. And people even confuse the two. Can you talk a little bit about the wellness versus well-being disparity and just how societally we think about it?
Absolutely. This is something that I love that goes back to alchemy, actually, which is like not to confuse words with the concepts that they represent. Because wellness and well-being, like, yes, I have an opinion. You can have an opinion. We all ultimately just have opinions on what those are. And so but what I see and where I think it can be really expansive to have a conversation of, oh yeah, like I wonder if, you reading that, or even me, whenever I was talking about it, I was like, or why I was talking about it was because I was like, I had never thought of them as separate, but I would definitely say that they have a different connotation, right? You agree?
Yep, totally.
So like with wellness, I would say that the connotation is more of what's coming to my mind is the visual of a fitness tracker, like an app where it's like you tick the box, you do the thing. Again, whenever I was saying like how I was motivated to be well because I wanted to dance, not because I wanted to be well. Right. Like if you're like, what I mean? It was a byproduct of the thing. Same kind of like with, I want to be creative. That's why I heal. Or that's why I do the self-discovery, because I want to fuel the creativity, because I think our natural state is creativity, love, joy, and well-being. So the World Health Organization uses the word well-being to define health. I feel like health and wellness are typically the grouping, right? And then well-being has this element that we're starting to dive into more and more. And I've heard people talk about it in relationships too, where as people many decades, even centuries ago, got into marriage as a like very contractual thing or for the farm or to make the, kids and do the whatever. And now there's this element of like, I want you to be my spiritual equal and to want to do the same things as me. And you have all of these other needs that are needing and not even needing to be met that we have the privilege of getting to meet. Right? Like not everyone who has problems today has problems such as how do I maximize my mental, physical, and emotional well-being? That's such a luxurious problem to get to have.
I laugh a lot because internally, right? Rarely to people's faces, but sometimes in people's faces. But I laugh a lot because the things that I hear myself complain about, maybe I'm depressed or maybe I'm just angry about something or annoyed, right? Whatever it might be, it gets you into this negative mind state. And you have to step back and look at it in the grand scheme of, the universe and realize the fact that you can't find the pasta sauce that you're looking for at the grocery store amongst the 300 different pasta sauces is really not that big of a problem. Or if someone cuts you off, it's not that big of a problem. I think your note there about, some of these issues being luxurious issues to have is something a lot of folks kind of forget in the moment. We become very self-absorbed, self-centered. It's a natural thing for us to do, but it bears a little bit of let's step back and laugh at the absurdity of what we're complaining about.
And I think it really is a testament to the emotional health part of things, because rarely is it about the pasta sauce in that situation. Like it's really not, there's something much deeper there typically. And so then in that moment, even saying, oh, this is a privileged problem, this is a first world problem, is actually kind of like bypassing it though. So you're still really not addressing it, even though, like you said, it can be really healthy to laugh it off. And that's where, again, it's not just like, oh, did I laugh off my problems today? Check the box on the fitness app. Or did I cry about all of my problems today? And then check off that in the fitness app. And that's where this sense of the choice, getting to make a choice, right? You have a choice in that moment of, am I going to let the pasta sauce stress me out? And if it's like, no, that is probably because it's a petty problem. But if it is yes, then where does that take you? Invite that emotion to the table. Why am I so frustrated right now? And these are practices. It's kind of like with a dance. That's like being able to get to that level of choice is like doing a pirouette in a dance. You're not just going to be able to pop up and do that necessarily. Like you got to get your footwork down first. You got to get there. So there are these different muscles, quote unquote, that you can flex just like you would for your physical health, for your mental health, and for your emotional health.
You had tied this in as well in one of your later episodes about strength and power. There's a third element in there. What was that?
Stability, yes. So
Stability.
Very key here in the process, stability first, because anything you're going to strengthen is what you're strengthening is whatever that base is. Right. Whatever you have of the basic movement patterns down, that's what you're then going to strengthen. And then through the strengthening, that's how you get to power. And now what that is the OPT model from NASM, the National Academy of Sports Medicine, where I was just certified as a personal trainer. So that is actually the fundamental. OPT stands for optimum performance training. And so that's the optimum performance training model of get the stability down first, then whatever that way you have the right muscle imbalances and stuff like that, because I got strong in some patterns that I don't necessarily want to be as strong in anymore, right? And I've had some years of softening now that I've been spending a lot more time writing than acting and dancing. But I'm really excited now. I'm like starting myself up on being my own little first client as a personal trainer to correct some muscle imbalances, not because I don't think I'm already a great dancer or whatever it is. But I know that if I fix that, I'm going to get more power. Like I'm going to be able to go further, right? It's not just that, oh, I've never been able to do the split, so I never can, or whatever it is. It's like, no, there's something about the way that you walk every day that's holding your hips and imprinting and strengthening and repeating that thing. That's why that part of you hurts for the most cases. You know, there's scoliosis, there's other stuff, but in general, that's the case. And so that's why stability is so key for the beginning. And I think it applies to so many different things, right? Say with editing, what if you got on a tool and there's a lot of ways to do it wrong, right? Or to do it in a way that takes 1,000 more hours, right? And so if that's the way that you start learning the basic movement pattern, and then you start doing that over and over and over, that's what you're going to strengthen. And that's ultimately what you'll have power in. And it's like, is that the power that you want?
It's a really interesting concept, and I could talk about this for hours, right? Because you tie it very well to creativity, right? And I love talking about, you know, how we use creativity. But I'll keep it defined here for a second. It's reps in a gym, right? That's what you have to do to build the strength to increase your power, right? But you have to have this baseline first where you start, all right, I know I can bench press 100 pounds. I can squat this many pounds. I can yada, yada, yada. And then from there, you increase reps, increase weight or number or whatever your goals are at the end so that you can create the power that you want to create. Now, the interesting thing that I find is that folks forget about the repetition part of it, and that it is going to take time. It's why it's called a yoga practice. It's why it's called meditation practice, right? Because it's those moments where you do try it and you realize that your neurons aren't firing the right way. Your body has to learn this new thing that you're doing. Over time, that strength builds and that power builds. And you now are teaching your body how to react to emotions and trauma and, you know, physical forces, all of the things that come along with change, the overwhelming capital C change that we try to go through, right? And you hit resistance after resistance and you want to quit, and there are tangents and there are rationales and reasons to not do the thing. But what I love about how simple this model is, you have your base, you do the work, you increase yourself. Now, at the end of that, you have a new baseline and you do more work and then you become a better version. And it's a great parallel to what we do in creativity, which is I want to paint or sculpt or photograph or dance or write or whatever. And when we do it at first, we suck badly at it. And then it just takes the dedication to the reps to keep moving forward and to keep growing and to keep producing, knowing that this discomfort, this resistance, this antipathy that we get from time to time is just a natural part of the process. We're so driven to have a problem, find a solution, press a button, make it go away, in a world where everything has been made very, very easy, that we've forgotten that the effort that goes into it is often just as powerful as the end result that you're striving for. As you tie this into creativity, and from your background as a dancer and a performer, do you find that there are any part of the phase that folks hit the most resistance in, or that you've hit the most resistance in? Is it at the early stages? Is it when you plateau and you just can't get any more out of the engine because you don't know what you don't know of how to fix it? Where do you tend to meet that most resistance? Is it the beginning, middle, or towards the end?
Well, I would say the beginning, but I would add to what you were saying. I literally had a thought today that was like, man, if I keep on preaching how it actually takes work and you have to put in reps, is like anyone gonna listen? Because I'm not selling quick wins. Like, wait. And I acknowledge that it was just a thought and the mind is tricky, you know, but it was definitely like literally a thought that I had. So I would say that case in point one of where people get stuck is they get sold rock hard abs by summer and it's May 3rd, you know, or what, like, and as if that's real. And even if the results do get there, it's not necessarily in a way that's super secure, or, like there are ways maybe to do that, but it's like, do they involve massive dehydration and all of these other things that as far as the long term, which again, you're not thinking about. And there's a study that's been done on this. The reason you'll always work out tomorrow is because present you does not associate tomorrow you as the same person. That's tomorrow's you's problem. That's not your problem. Working out isn't your problem. Totally. Of course I'll do, or not even working out, whatever the thing is, I'll do XYZ tomorrow. Then it's not my problem. Right. And then because like I was saying, every day you have the opportunity to be born again, like the sun. And so then here I am as this new person, potentially the choice, right? I think our main creative power is our ability to choose. Like when we open up our eyes, what do we want to do? What's the first thing that we do? Where do we go? What do we put in our body? How do we move our body? What are our relationships? Like all of these things we do. Now there's going to be external factors impacting us, but ultimately your greatest creative power is your ability to make choices. And like, because with every choice that you make, you're creating a different alternative, right? You're creating strength in one of those different directions. But that's where we get to, I definitely resonate with the plateau element though. I read a book a long time ago that talked about the path of mastery as you get an initial, like, oh my gosh, I start to get better. And then you get a little bit worse and then you plateau. And then you have another, and then you're doing your reps, or you fall off, or whatever, or you don't because there's no more quick wins or whatever it is. Then, so you hit that first plateau and then suddenly you'll hit the next spike and then it'll drop down a little bit. And then you'll plateau again, and up each of those steps go until ultimately you're at whatever point of power or, the goodness you want to be at in the particular, whatever it is you're mastering.
I'm going to go back about 30 seconds. And you were talking about, the future you versus the present you. And this is one of the things that I learned from Sue Bryce years ago in terms of just journal prompting. How we speak to ourselves and what we say about ourselves is not, I need to make $100,000 next year, or I'm going to start working out or whatnot. Right in the present tense, right? I am working out, and create that person that is the future version of you, but start speaking like it's already occurred. There is a power in that because you do start to shorten that time between present you and future you by assuming the identity of that person that you want to be. And now you're creating an entirely new version of you that you are ingraining the beliefs in yourself that is who you are. So you're negating this bumping heads between present you and future you. Do you use any of those techniques when you're journaling or thinking about this stuff? It's clear that you kind of monitor your own thoughts all the time, but how do you approach that with, journaling or keeping yourself on track? Because we can fall off of it so easily.
I can't. No, I've been journaling. I'm literally sitting next to a tub I put them in a tub because they were in a wooden thing until we got flooded, and thank goodness they were protected. But I was like, this is now going in like a waterproof thing. Sure. But I have years and years of journals. I've always been a journaler. I absolutely love it. I encourage it as a practice for sure. But so I definitely do that. And I have a way of doing that comes from the Celtic Druid alchemy magic that I love so much. And so in this, there's this idea of, okay, think of like what we call past, present, future.
Okay.
Right. So you're talking about like present you, future you. There's also past you, is another one of those things that you can butt heads with. We go back there all the time. Anyone, so as much as we can be worrying about the future, we also go back and feel guilt or shame about the past, right? There's that one too. So they describe it as root, pattern, destiny. So if you think of it as the past is just the root, the present is the pattern, and then the future is the destiny. So kind of like what we were going back to talking about reps, right? Like what's the basic movement pattern? The past is the root of that. You're saying, oh, I know I can bench press 100. How do you know that? We weren't born knowing that or being able to do that. There's still a basic pattern there, right? There's something that's rooted, the basic pattern, and then the destiny. So ultimately what it becomes, like if your knees are going in every time you squat, When you're squatting 200, your knees are going to be going in until ultimately whatever that can cause as far as injury and stuff like that. And it won't necessarily, but it really increases the likelihood and stuff. And your body is also doing this like kind of economics around like, oh, if I compensate here, then like this can be here and that sort of thing. What I do whenever I journal, especially on new moons and full moons, whenever I'm doing something more like intention setting-y, I have been, I am, I will be. So if it's like, say, like something around money, it's like, I have been dealing with a scarcity mindset. I am feeling more abundant every day. I will see whatever dollars in my bank account. So you're associating that sense of acknowledging the root pattern and destiny, and ultimately that I am in the context of the root and the destiny, or the past and the future.
I think that's a really important point, because we can focus on pretty much any one of those things really, really well. It's a bit more difficult and takes a few more reps and a little bit more practice to be able to see all three at once and keep them interconnected, right? It's easy to say, I was a piece of shit in my past and all of those thoughts being negative, but I'm going to be Superman in the future and all that's way out of reach positive. And then you're stuck here in the middle and you can say, well, I'm doing the best I can, right? And so what we're able to do is hyper focus on one of them, but it takes a lot of practice to look at them all and keep them all connected in a way that is healthy for us to be thinking about it, rather than doing more detriment under the guise of I'm journaling and I'm writing all my stuff down. Yeah. It's very easy to see when I go back through my old journals, like, wow, I know exactly where my head was. I was like, the words I was using were not really helpful. It might have felt good to vent it out into paper, but it wasn't helping me create a better version of myself.
That's the choice part, right?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
You know what I mean? And why it's ultimately so creative. If you had somehow had an awareness in that moment, right? That future you is coming in and being able to say, look at this way, look at this way, as if you could have had that kind of like as a download in the moment and all of a sudden made a new choice of, I may have felt this way about that situation, but I am, and then choice as far as what's being made new, like that, there's so much power in that, but there's also a lot of power in giving yourself grace when you go back through those older journals too. I know that part very well.
Oh, it's right. Again, this is me looking at it and kind of laughing, right? As you grow, you kind of realize like, oh, I'm never going to ride downhill on a mountain bike. And then you do it a couple of times. You're like, oh, I guess I can do it. It's not that hard. It's not that bad. But it was this big, scary thing. And I think as I read back, I'm like, oh, wow, that part of me thought that was such a big, scary moment. Hey, here I am now. It really wasn't that scary. And I know how to approach it next time it comes around. So I like going back through that just to, again, remind myself too of how far you do come as you start to grow. All right. So now we've got our person who's not only well adjusted, but they've got their thoughts in line and they find themselves in the state of flow. Now, as a creative, I know in hindsight when I was in a state of flow. Sometimes you feel it in the moment. For me, rarely do I feel it in the moment because I'm just doing. Like I come down and I look at it and I go, oh, I was really in flow. That felt awesome. That was effortless. That state also becomes something where you can create the skills, create the reps to achieve it more often. Now, I know that state of flow has been something that you've talked about quite a bit, and maybe we can dig in there a little bit because I know, for example, when I'm photographing someone, let me step back. When I book a client and we go through our consultation and they're coming in for their session this morning, inevitably, I've been doing this a long time, inevitably, I've got butterflies, I've got imposter syndrome, I've got all these things kind of mixed up, giving me bubble guts and going, this is not going to go well. I do the shoot. Everything always goes well, knock on wood. And then at the end, I can look back and be like, wow, these pictures are great. I don't even remember taking some of these because I was so in the moment of just creating for me, creating for the client. There was nothing else on my mind. And that's a wonderful place to be because I'm not clouded by all this other stuff that I have to do. From your perspective, are there techniques that you've learned throughout your career or things that you're practicing now that help you get into that state of flow? I don't want to say on demand, but more easily.
Yeah. And it all comes back to presence.
Yeah.
That present moment. And it's actually so interesting how you just described that, because you were talking about being in the work, right? And then the consciousness was able to come on later, which is a really interesting way to think about, because I wouldn't say you weren't present during the shoot, right? It sounds like you were incredibly present during the shoot, and yet this voice wasn't there. So that voice, I'm just, this is turning into like an inquisition, but
no, push it out of me, like use it, because I don't really think about it until I got into this conversation about flow. I just know when it has occurred. And if you've spoken to me for any length, which we have, I do stay relatively present, and I'm pretty good about being in the moment. However, when I'm in that creative flow, when I'm making music, or maybe I'm editing a video, or I'm working in the wood shop, or whatever it is, where I'm just producing with abandon, with no expectation, that is when I find that I'm doing some of my best work, and that at the same time, I'm not even thinking that, oh, great, I'm in flow. Perfect. Now I know I'm going to make something good.
Right. As soon as you are, you're not really in flow.
I'm out of it. I'm gone. Yeah. So,
but I think that you just answered your question really, because it's that sense of no expectation, right? Because that's what's differentiating it from those other moments of that voice being in your head. So one of my favorite books is called The Inner Game of Tennis. And it was recommended to me by an acting teacher in college. He was like, this is the best acting book you'll ever read, but it's about tennis and mindset. But in this book, he talks about how people, whenever, like, say they swing, he coaches people in tennis, and say they swing and they miss. And they're going, oh, shoot, I should have, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, who are you talking to? I'm talking to myself. He's like, oh, okay. So he starts to break down I and myself. And this is something I have seen because I've taught hundreds of dance classes, and I see it time and time again. We spend 55 minutes learning the dance, and people have got it, and we're running through it, and we're having a good time. And then it's like, okay, guys, let's bring out the camera and film. And all of a sudden they're like, I learned to dance? What? like, what do I do with my hands? I don't know. What do I do with my face? But it's to exactly what you said. I did such good words for it. There's no expectation, or there wasn't for 55 minutes besides the doing of it, the learning of it. And then all of a sudden there's this expectation. So in this book, he breaks down I and myself into person one and person two, where the I is this conscious thinking, right? I am talking to myself. So the I is that consciousness, while the myself is the part that actually does it, because the myself was the part doing the reps. Right. The myself was in the class, learning the movements, doing it, because your brain in that moment is going 5, 6, 7, 8, or you know what I mean? Like so that's why I love to give the brain a little task of like, okay, the I part of it, you can count, rather than trying to now come in. You were gone for 55 minutes. You want to come back in now and tell me how to do this dance that you are not here to learn? Like, no, get out of here. Like myself, it has to come through myself. And so I think that when it comes to like getting into that state on demand, there's just the practice of the abandon, and that being a safe place, like that there is not just an expectation. And this is why healing is so important, because especially if it relates to trauma, like you're not going to be able to leave that hypervigilance. Like you're not going to be able to leave that place of, I have to control the situation, because if not, I could get hurt very badly. Like that, like I'm getting kind of emotional thinking about it. like there was definitely a long time that I know that I was like the amount of control, the amount of forcing that I was doing was very much because that was how I survived. And it's like, again, we were talking about going back to those journals, like giving that self-grace. But I get why it's so important. But like just to be give anyone hope who's like in that place, like you can unlearn it though, right? You can arrive to a place of security and to a place of where abandon is a really joyful thing rather than something that puts you into fight or flight. Because even you described going into the photo shoot, that sense of butterflies, and those kinds of things. And if you are somatically in a place where that level of uncertainty or excitement, just like the body doesn't necessarily know the difference between fear and excitement. And especially if you are used to that fear really having bad consequences, then that can really mimic a scary situation versus one that's ultimately positive and creative, like your photo shoot. And so I think that that's why healing can be so important around that flow state, because if you really don't feel safe surrendering, if you do not feel like you can trust, then you're not going to go to that place of abandon and have no expectation because you are controlling for survival.
For a long time, mainly in the corporate career, but even early on in my photo career, I was in a constant state of fight or flight. I had grown up, without going too far into the story, with this constant survival mentality. I've got to survive. I've got to get through this home situation. I've got to get through bullies. I've got to get through my own neurodivergency. I've got to get through all these things that I don't understand how to handle. And it created this survival instinct, right? And a lot of habits in me that have affected relationships and business and money. And I mean, it all cascades. But I found that after so many decades of living in this state, that it became my normal. It became my baseline. It was only after I really started to look inward that I realized there was so much attributed to burnout of perfectionism, of trying to make the situation better, trying to control things over and over, because I felt like if I could control my environment, then everything will be okay. And to a degree, that's exactly what I did. But keeping your mental state, your adrenal system, everything going at red line for so many years creates this burnout, this feeling of ennui, this desire to do nothing but just kind of get to tomorrow. I know that burnout has been something that was difficult for me to recognize at first. Mm-hmm. But after doing all the work that has been done, it's easier to recognize if I'm acting a certain way towards my friends, if I'm feeling less interest or less motivation to do the work that I love, the stuff that I love doing. If I'm not doing it or desiring to do it, I've realized that these are early symptoms of burnout. Probably not even early symptoms. They're probably, pretty moderate symptoms of burnout. This is something I know you've dealt with in the past. Again, I know how I've dealt with things and I've got my own techniques for seeing that, but I'm always interested in talking about burnout because we've become so accustomed in the United States to being burned out and having it be a badge of honor than having it be something that is physically and mentally detrimental. We say, oh, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm so busy. I can't even get anything done. And I've got no time for this and the kids and the job and yada, yada, yada. Again, all of that is a choice, right? It's all a choice of how you approach some of these things. I used to try to compete. Yeah, you're tired. I'm more tired. You're busy. I'm busier, right? Because we're trying to build a tribe. We're trying to relate. We're trying to do these things. But all we're doing is sharing this awful trait that we have together and saying, yeah, we're both in this deep, dark pit. Do you know how to get out? No, but let's keep talking about the pit. So how do you deal with burnout when you are going through these periods of severe, I don't want to say mental anguish. That's not the right word. Heaviness, this weight, right? Where you've just got a lot of things to sort out or heal or deal with. And it starts to bring on those feelings of burnout. How do you deal with that?
I think I deal with it differently now than I used to because the foundation of the house is better, right? So even though like a burnout coming in is like a hurricane or whatever, I've got a generator, you know what I mean? Hey, right. I know at the beginning it was a lot more pain. It was to your point of like much more severe anguish is a great word to use. I feel like now I don't even really let myself get burned out. And I would say why is the tool or how I deal with it is how I think of polarity as a whole. Well, I think of everything as one ultimately. Sure. So like there's just like a oneness. And then, but within that, there's like that which is, and then that which is not, which ultimately makes polarity. And so then now we're dancing with two. And then that dance of two ultimately makes three. And so then you have 1, 2, 3, and everything is off. And that 3 is like the cycling through everything. And so I think when I think of polarity and why I think of it for burnout is because there are active and passive forces. There's like radiating and receiving energy. There's the sun and then the moon, And so you've got these two forces, this dynamic, this polarity. And so I don't think anymore of being busy having to look like a ton of things on my calendar. Being busy doesn't have to mean a ton of radiating energy or active forces. Being busy can actually be a lot of receiving and being a lot of passive, like passive is still a force, active is a force. And so it's like, that's why I don't necessarily get into burnout now, because it's like, am I balanced between my active forces, my power, determination, the radiating energies versus my receiving energies, my passive energies? And so I can clock very quickly. It's how I built my schedule around the moons, especially like in just what I do to work. Like the podcast is released on new moons and full moons, and it's like cyclical and it's part of a ritual. And so there's not the sense of like you were saying, oh, I have to do it, or I have to, you know what I mean? Grinding into that, it's like, and as soon as I feel that, it's one of those muscles, right? As soon as I feel that, not always, but nowadays, as soon as I feel that, I know it's time to not do it. Whereas before it was definitely like, oh, this feels bad, try harder. And it was then get more busy and push, radiate, active, force versus like, wow, it's time to receive. It's time to be passive and acknowledge that I'm still getting where I need to go or whatever. I think ultimately too, actually what's helped a lot with my concept of burnout is this quote by, I think, Joan Didion, where she's like, I don't even know if making the world a better place is part of it, like is even actually possible. Like the world is just the place that it is, going back to the oneness side of things, right? And so it's like, where am I really trying to get to? It's Zeno's theory of incompleteness. The difference between the distance from like me to you, right? I would have to go halfway. And then I have to go half of that. Then I'd have to go half of that. And you never get there. And so I feel like that's also something that's helped. I haven't always had that mindset, that awareness, and that helps a lot with burnout.
I hadn't connected those two. And I love that radiant versus receiving energy. I certainly spend more time in the radiant energy world, right? I think most of us do, because that's just how we're built now, where we're constantly trying to produce, put out more expectation on us from everywhere. And so we feel wrapped up in that energy, and that rest and relaxation and reception feels like slack, laziness, procrastination. And it's nothing other than your own perception of what that means. I just hadn't heard those two, like the polarity discussion and speaking about them in that way, about balance. I am often someone, if you've talked to me for 30 seconds, you'll know that I am generally out of balance in one way or another. And I pendulum swing between I'm wildly happy and wildly upset. And that can happen in the span of 30 seconds. And then I'm back to happiness. But there's this, I'm only in one state, and it's the seesaw that's constantly going up and down. And rarely do I ever feel like, the oceans are calm. I'm in balance. this is how it's supposed to be. Or again, we're at that concept of flow, right? There's this ultimate point where I envision myself in balance, quote unquote balance, air quotes balance, whatever balance means to you. I find that I'm constantly trying for balance, which is probably counterintuitive now that I say it out loud, instead of just doing the things that I know bring me happiness, bring me pleasure, bring me rest, bring me strength, right? All of these different things tie in to the overall concept of balance. And by trying to do too much to achieve balance, you're actually throwing yourself more out of balance. I think that's kind of pretty much how I define it. But I love that you have this concept of the polarity of the energies, and that therein is the answer. It is finding the balance of those forces.
Well, two things. One, there's a great saying, perfect balance is perfect stagnation. And so that it's not even about trying to achieve balance. There's the concept of constructive imbalance. And that's that just the right amount of resistance, that just the right amount. There's like a challenge threshold before it becomes, not so frustrating that you don't even want to do it, but just challenging enough. That's this constructive imbalance. It's this pendulum swing, because that's the dance, right? That's the three, that's the cycles. That's the fact that, yes, there's the two sides, but we're going to be cycling through them. And so it's never even about, actually, a lot of the magic wasn't even done on new moons and full moons. It was done on the weak point, on the quarter moon, because it's imbalance. Same with it's not about the equinoxes. It would be about the solstice, whenever it's all sun and where there's a lot of imbalance versus balance, right, on an equinox. But the other thing that I would say there is, you were talked about being in the radiating energy a lot more than the receiving energy. But I would even argue that, and this just hit me as you were talking, actually though, we're receiving all the time. Anytime you get on your phone, and you look at something where you're receiving whatever, there's a consumption about it. What are you consuming? Are you consuming sunlight and water, or are you consuming social media, news, and alcohol? You're going to feel really different from receiving either of those. You laugh.
I feel so attacked. You're reframing things in a way that just make a lot of sense for me. Now, that isn't the same for everyone, but by reframing these things, hearing, reading, listening, watching, receiving these different ways of looking at it is really starting to help me. Do you find that there is a source that you go to a lot when you know that you need to grow? When you know that you need to learn more about a subject? Do you read? Do you watch? Do you just think? Do you dance? What's the thing that gets you back into that growth mindset and that growth mentality?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Definitely all of the above. I love learning. I'm a really good learner. I learn all the time. It's something. So I'm right. As soon as the certification ended, I picked up another course, and I'm also going to do the certified nutrition coach as well. Yeah. I think that there's something where it's almost like an accomplishment kink, where you just have to achieve, but which definitely why, again, leads to burnout and those kinds of things. And so it's can the accomplishment be sitting in silence by the river? Because to your point, I think that the awareness, or having a different, changing the perspective around some of these things, is really what it takes, because that ultimately changes the behavior, which ultimately changes the material manifestation. And so that's why I think it's so important, the power of the stories we tell ourselves, the power of the beliefs that we hold, because they do shape that frame. What does success look like? What is love? What is divinity? Your answers to those questions are going to affect the work that you do, how busy you are. Going back to, again, why I don't feel burnt out anymore is because I'm not trying to get anywhere besides more joy every day. You know what I mean? Curiosity is an incredible fuel. It actually replaced like what used to be oh, I hope one day I'm good enough, kind of like motivation. And a lot of people don't want to get rid of that because then they're like, well, what will happen to my fire? What will happen to my willpower if I'm not trying to get that? It's like, oh, we're actually incredibly curious and creative and imaginative, and stuff can fill that space. And so actually, to answer your question, though, I would say right now, the place that I go is silence.
Yeah.
It's like revolutionary. I am going to drop the most amazing idea on you. You can sit in silence.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a course on it? Because I think that would...
We just did it. That's
the whole thing. Don't give it away.
I'm all about value.
I think you're right. There was a day, I think it was last Thursday, I was prepping for a weekend away, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I was sitting on my deck with my dog. I realized I hadn't spoken to another human in 2 days. By not getting all this input from social media and from people's opinions and just, satisfying friends and talking to people that I know, it gave me a lot of contentment. It gave me a lot of peace. I then went to a weekend house music festival out in New York, thrown by a buddy of mine, and there were a lot of people there, and I get sensory overload. It was amazing music and a wonderful vibe, really, really cool people. I had a great time. But there were stretches, 5, 6, 7 hours where I'm watching DJs perform sets, and I spoke not a word for 7 hours. And it was this quiet contentment, again, amidst the chaos. So when you're finding your quiet, when you're finding your silence, when you're doing that, are you able to do that? Like, do you have a certain section of your home? Do you need to, have a meditation room? Maybe you're doing yoga or something to that effect. Or can you achieve that by remaining active as well?
I think it can definitely be both. I would say that I hesitate in any practice to make it too religious. Again, tick all the boxes in the app, and then I tracked it, and then I did my meditation. It's like, no, if I didn't feel my heart open, I was talking to a friend about this the other day. She was talking to this guy who was saying that he went to this men's retreat and it was all great. And she's like, yeah, but did you cry? And he was like, no, but I heard about speakers on enlightenment and blah, blah. And she's like, did you cry? He was like there was no heart in it, no, like, not that the crying is the only way, but based on where this person was as far as emotional availability, she knew it was like the right question. And lately I have a timer on my phone that I just press start on for 45 minutes. And I just hit that as soon as I've brushed my teeth, everything ready for bed. That way I can just get right into bed after, and I just lay on my yoga mat. I don't have to do anything. I can stretch if I want. I can dance if I want or whatever, but I just lay on my mat in silence, and I can, go into pigeon pose for 10 minutes or whatever it is. But ultimately, what I'll do is lay there. And as soon as I start to hear that voice, this kind of gets back into this helps you master that I and myself, right? That top part of you that's talking and not to. As soon as I hear it going, I just go silence. And then I come back, and then usually 3 seconds later, I have to say silence again. But I'm doing it, and that has been the space that I've created.
I like that. I think we don't place enough value on that, just stepping back from it all, everything, from the thoughts, from the sounds, from everything. But I think giving yourself all the best environment for you to start practicing that is probably beneficial. A separate place, a quiet room away from the kids, non-interrupted, whatever it might be. It was an awakening moment for me to realize, as someone who talks for a living generally, that no words was pretty awesome from anywhere. It was great. I did want to get back to your podcast a little bit. And I know that there was one episode I didn't listen to, but you had 3 questions in there that you asked me. I'd love to know what that is. So full on spoil it for me.
I love that episode. And I love that you're bringing it up, because It to me is actually like what I consider the methodology behind what I call mystical movement, why I call it the mystical movement show, is these 3 questions, because it's a dance of mind, body, and soul. So the 3 questions are, what is the story I'm telling myself? Mm-hmm. What is the action I take because of that story? And then how do I feel doing or thinking that? Mm-hmm. And so those 3 questions, it addresses the mind, like what's the story? Because you could even do this in a dance, right? Yeah. If I would perform the same exact choreography differently if I'm like, pretend you just like won $1 million, right? Versus do this as if your friend just died. You could do the same kind of choreography, but the story is going to completely impact how that manifests physically. So what's the story I'm telling myself? And you got to listen to the episode, because I really go into how the brain is like a computer, like it's teleological in that your success mechanism, essentially, as far as like, here's the goal, here's the story. If the story is, I am worthy, then all of that unconscious myself part is going to deliver on that, right? If the code, like machines run on scripts, your brain is running on these stories, on these scripts that it has. And that's what's operating as far as like how the things manifest. So what's the story I'm telling myself? Mm-hmm. What do I do because of that story? And then going into the physical, you are what you repeatedly do, right? So like, what are the things? How does that physically manifest? And then the emotional side of it. And then how do I feel doing or thinking that? Because our emotions are such a beautiful guide that connects us back to our heart, which is the fuel of it all. That's the spoiler of the 3 questions, but I also just love how I lay it out in that episode as far as like why. If you're not sold on just starting to ask yourself those 3 questions, you will be sold by the end.
I can envision myself writing that at the top of every journal, right? Every day. What am I doing? How do I feel about it? Right? All of those prompts really do make you start to look inward. What's really happening there? What are those involuntary subconscious feelings? Where do our thoughts come from? Is that really the root of all of this, or is it a little bit deeper? I would tend to believe that almost anything that we think about, there's another reason a little bit deeper and then a little bit deeper. Is there ever a point where you get to where you're like, there's the root? Or when you get to that point, you say, well, there's probably something else behind that.
I think that we can keep going with that. We're infinite. Yeah. So I could see those questions definitely being infinite. But you know the tarot, mm-hmm. right? You're familiar with tarot and like the major arcana. Mm-hmm. So I see, and this is based off of a book called The Law of One. It's this perception of the major arcana as, so 7, 3 sets of 7 is 21, right? 3 times 7 is 21. And then you've got 0, the Fool, being choice, ultimately being like your choice. Again, the creative spark behind it all, just that you get to choose the Fool, being, you're like, back to your question, can there be a root? It's like such a fool's question, right? But then it starts with the mind, 1, the magician, that matrix of the mind, and then like first 7 being all of the mind complex. And then this second set of 7 starting with balance or justice, all the way through to the transformation of the body, death, right to the alchemist, the great way of the body. And then starting again with the spirit, the matrix of the spirit, the devil, all the way to the potentiator of the spirit, the catalyst, the experience, the significator, the transformation, and the great way. I love a good system. And it really helped me to understand that these weren't just like, this is just what the magician means or whatever. It's like, it's part of a system. And so they all start with like the base of what the mind is. There's the base of what the physical is. There's the base of what the emotional or the spiritual world is. And then how those all go through. So going back to the mind then is, it starts with the magician, and then you have, right, high priestess, empress, and then emperor before the Hierophant. And so that's where you get into like this conscious and unconscious. So it's like the magician being like, abracadabra means I create as I speak. Mm. So it's like this very much this concept of like thoughts become things, and like how so is because of like those stories, and right. And then it goes into the unconscious with the emperor, the 2 feminine, high priestess and empress, and then the 2 masculine being the conscious. So that's like the unconscious, and then the conscious mind of the emperor and the hierophant. And then ultimately the lovers, this dance between conscious and unconscious. And then the chariot, which is being able to ride on a chariot through the back and forth. Like you're talking about, do you ever get to the root? It's like, does that chariot ever run out of pathway as far as how it can keep on dancing? And that's just the mind. It doesn't, because we're even to say, do we get to the root? That's actually a very physical, we're attributing, or like it's an attribute, right, of the body, a concept of a root. And that doesn't really apply to the mind complex like it does the body complex.
I love that answer. And I think it's a perfect place to leave it, because I know I'm going to go back and listen to these episodes and really start to think about that a little bit differently. And I definitely want to go back and listen to the 2 episodes that I haven't listened to yet. And I want everybody to go there and check it out, because this is the kind of stuff that you talk about, right? This isn't like we're exposing anything new here. This is all what's on the Mystical Movement show. It is everything that you're talking about. And it comes from a lot of your own experience and what you've dealt with. And I love how that comes across so naturally and authentically. You're doing it in real time with an audience. You are taking your past, you are healing yourself, you are questioning everything, and you're coming out with new realizations, and you're taking everyone along for the ride with it. I love how you do that and tie it into creativity and everything that you're doing there too. So as someone, again, that loves the essence of creativity, I think you're doing a phenomenal job. So where can everybody find everything?
You can just look up the Mystical Movement Show on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Follow me on Instagram. Send me a DM if you have any questions about anything, or you want to just talk about anything that we talked about. Because as Matt said, I love talking about this sort of stuff. And you said that this is what I talk about there, but it's always different whenever it's through someone else's lens. And so I really appreciate all of your awesome questions and bringing all that stuff up. So, and then also themysticalmovement.com.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I can't wait to see you. Next time you're kind of in the New England, Boston area from Missouri, just give me a holler. I'll drive as far as I need to, and we'll have this conversation again. What do you think?
There's probably better calamari there.
You know what? We have some seafood in the area.
Do you?
It's all right. But no, thank you again so much. And I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Me too.
All right. Take care.